They never imagined that the man they called a liability would become the most reliable person in our daughter's entire life. But that's the thing about people who judge others by their job title, they always miss what actually matters. My father spent 31 years as a senior partner at one of the most recognized litigation firms on Bay Street. My mother was appointed to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice when I was 15 years old. I grew up in a house in Rosedale, where the bookshelves were organized by legal category, and dinner conversations were mock cross-examinations. They were not bad people. They were just people who had decided, very early on, that success looked exactly one way, and that anything outside that shape was failure. I met Marcus in my second year at the University of Toronto. I was studying economics, which my father considered an acceptable detour before law school, and Marcus was doing a night class in structural engineering fundamentals because his union local offered it, and he wanted to understand the buildings he was helping to put up. He was 24. He was training as an ironworker, local 736 out of Hamilton. He had calloused hands and a laugh that started somewhere deep in his chest, and he had absolutely no interest in impressing anyone. We were friends for almost 8 months before anything changed between us. I told my mother about him in the spring, carefully, the way you approach a sleeping animal. I said he was someone I'd been spending time with. I said he worked in construction. I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of blankness, like a door quietly closing. My father's reaction was more direct. He said Marcus was a fine person, surely, but that this wasn't the kind of relationship that had a future. He said the word ironworker, the way some people say the name of a street they'd never drive down. He said I had a trajectory and that I needed to think carefully about what I was doing to it. I was 21 years old. I was in love. I thought they would come around. By October, I knew I was pregnant. Marcus and I had only been together properly for 4 months. I sat in my apartment bathroom for a long time after the test, not crying, just thinking. When I told Marcus, he sat down next to me on the bathroom floor and held my hand and said, quietly, that we were going to be okay, that he was not going anywhere, and that whatever I decided, he would support me completely. He didn't perform. He didn't panic. He just stayed. I told my parents on a Sunday afternoon in November. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived. My father was in his study. I waited until they were both seated in the living room, and then I told them, simply, that I was 12 weeks pregnant, and that Marcus and I were going to have this baby, and that we were planning to get married. The silence lasted a long time. My mother asked if I was certain. My father asked if Marcus understood the financial responsibility involved. And then, after I had answered both questions as calmly as I could, my father told me that if I was making this choice, I was making it without their support. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He explained it the way he might explain a clause in a contract, clear terms, no ambiguity. If I continued this relationship, if I had this baby, if I married this man, I was on my own. Financially, practically, entirely. My mother looked at her hands the whole time. I drove back to my apartment and called Marcus and said, simply, that we needed to start figuring things out. He came over that night with groceries and didn't ask me to explain everything at once. He just made dinner and sat beside me, and that was the night I understood, completely, what kind of man I had chosen. We got married the following March at a small venue in the Distillery District. 22 people attended. All of them were from Marcus's family or our close friends. There was not a single person there from my side of the family, not my parents, not my aunt in Kingston, not my cousin who had been my closest friend growing up. I had invited them, every one of them. The responses, where there were any, were polite and distant and final. I wore my grandmother's earrings, the ones she had given me when I turned 18. She passed away 2 years before this all happened. I think she would have liked Marcus. She always cared more about what people did than what they were called. Our daughter was born in July, 7 months after our wedding. We named her Lily. She had Marcus's dark eyes and, apparently, my stubbornness, which Marcus says he noticed within the first 48 hours. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Hamilton by then, which we were slowly outgrowing in every direction. Hamilton was not where I had imagined myself at 22, but it was where Marcus's work was centered, where his union connections were strongest, and honestly, it was where we could actually afford to build something. Toronto had become a city where young families were being priced out of real life, and I was not interested in spending the next decade anxious about rent while pretending otherwise. We found a semi-detached in the East End, saved for 2 years, and bought it when Lily was 18 months old. My in-laws helped us with the down payment, quietly, without conditions attached. I went back to school part-time when Lily was 2, finished my economics degree, and eventually built a career in financial planning. I became a certified financial planner when Lily was 6. By the time she was 10, I was running my own small practice with 2 associate planners working with me. I am not telling you this to perform success. I'm telling you because my father once said, in that calm and measured tone of his, that I was making a decision I would spend my life regretting. I did not spend my life regretting it. Lily grew up knowing her father worked on buildings. She knew the CN Tower and the Stony Creek Industrial Complex and half a dozen bridges across southern Ontario, the way other kids knew their father's office, as places where he went and did something real, and came home tired, proud. She would sometimes ask Marcus to explain what ironworkers actually did, and he would sit at the kitchen table with her and draw sketches of connection points and load paths, and she would ask questions until she understood. She is now 13 years old, and she wants to study civil engineering. She says her father taught her to read buildings the way other people read books. We did not talk much about my parents during those years. Lily knew she had maternal grandparents who were not part of our lives. We kept it simple and honest. We told her that sometimes families have disagreements that are very difficult to repair, and that it had nothing to do with her. She accepted this with the particular wisdom children sometimes have about things adults overcomplicate. I thought about my parents, of course. My mother especially. There were moments Lily's first day of school, the day I passed my CFP exam, our 10th anniversary, when I felt something that wasn't quite grief but lived in the same neighborhood. A wondering. A door I had stopped expecting to open. Then, 13 years after my wedding, my mother knocked on our front door in Hamilton on a Tuesday evening in September. Marcus and I were cleaning up after dinner. Lily was upstairs doing homework. The knock was hesitant, nothing like the way I remembered my mother moving through the world. I opened the door and stood there for a moment, just looking at her. She was smaller than I remembered. Her hair had gone fully gray. She was wearing a coat I didn't recognize, and she had her hands clasped in front of her the way people stand when they're not sure they're allowed to be somewhere. She said my name. That was all, at first. Just my name. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room. Marcus brought tea without being asked, and then quietly found something else to do, which is exactly the kind of thing Marcus does. My mother looked around the room at the photos on the wall, at Lily's backpack on the chair, at the built-in bookshelf Marcus had made when Lily was 4, and I watched her absorb the life she had not been part of. She told me my father had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's 2 years earlier. She told me that his condition had progressed faster than expected, and that he had had to step back from the firm. She told me that the transition had been, financially, more difficult than anticipated. I asked her what she meant by difficult. She explained, slowly, that my father's equity stake in the firm had been structured in a way that was contingent on active partnership status, and that when he stepped back, the buyout had been significantly less than they had planned for. She told me that they had made some investments in the previous year's real estate partnerships, a venture my father had been persuaded to enter by a colleague, and that those investments had not performed the way they were promised. She said the word fraud quietly, as if it cost her something to admit it. I sat with this information. Then she told me the rest. They had sold the Rosedale house. They were renting an apartment in North York. My mother's judicial pension covered basic expenses, but my father's ongoing medication costs, his specialist appointments, the private physiotherapy that OHIP didn't fully cover, it was adding up in ways they had not prepared for. She said they had been managing, And then she said, more quietly, that they were no longer managing. She was not crying. My mother does not cry easily. But she was not the woman who had sat in that living room in Rosedale and looked at her hands while my father explained the terms of my disappearance. She was someone different. Or maybe she was the same person finally out of the armor that position and comfort had given her. I asked her why she had come to me specifically. She said that my father had not wanted her to. She said he had argued against it. That it was his pride more than anything. That he felt coming here was an admission he wasn't ready to make. But she had come anyway, because I was her daughter, and because she had spent 13 years understanding, slowly, painfully, how wrong they had been. I asked her where my father was. She said he was at home, that he didn't know she was here tonight, that she had wanted to come first, alone, because she felt she owed me that the conversation without him in it, the acknowledgement that she had her own accounting to do separate from his. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I heard Lily on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway in her socks and her school sweatshirt, and she looked at my mother with the frank curiosity of a 13-year-old, and she said, politely, "Hello." My mother looked at her, like someone seeing something they had been trying to picture for a very long time. I said, "Lily, this is your grandmother." Lily looked at me, then back at my mother, processing this with the same quiet efficiency she approaches everything. She said it was nice to meet her. My mother said, in a voice I had never heard from her before, that it was very nice to meet Lily too. And there was something in how she said it, a fullness, a recognition that I felt in my chest without wanting to. Lily asked if anyone wanted more tea, because Marcus had apparently raised her right, and then she retreated back upstairs, and my mother and I sat in the silence she left behind. I told my mother that I needed time. I told her that I was not going to make any decisions that evening, that I needed to talk to Marcus, and that she should not read anything into whatever came next. I told her that I had built a good life, that I was not angry in the way I had once been angry, but that I was also not prepared to pretend that 13 years was a small thing. I told her that what my father had said to me, the terms he had laid out, the way they had both been absent for Lily's entire childhood, that was not something I was able to simply set aside because the circumstances had changed. My mother nodded. She said she understood. She said she was not asking me to set it aside. She said she was asking me to consider, when I was ready, whether there was any version of a future that included them. She left her phone number on a piece of paper she had brought with her, already written out, as if she had known she would need it. She stood in our front hallway and looked at me for a long moment, and then she put her hand briefly on my arm, and she left. I stood at the door after she drove away. The street was quiet. The neighbor's maple was starting to turn, the edges of the leaves going orange in the September dark. Marcus found me still standing there a few minutes later. He didn't ask me to explain everything at once. He put his arm around me, and we stood there together, and eventually he said, quietly, that we could figure out whatever came next, and that Lily was asking if there was any ice cream left. We spent the next 2 weeks talking, Marcus and I, honestly and thoroughly, the way we had learned to talk over 13 years of building something from scratch. I talked to a therapist I had been seeing on and off for years. I sat with the weight of it, the history of it, the cost. I thought about what my mother had asked, not for money immediately, though I understood that was likely coming, but for consideration, for a door. I thought about my father, the man who had explained my own erasure to me, in a calm voice in a Rosedale living room, who had chosen his idea of legacy over his daughter, who was now, somewhere in a North York apartment, living with a degenerative illness and the knowledge that his professional identity, the thing he had sacrificed, everything to protect, had already ended. I thought about Lily, who had done nothing except exist, and who had been denied grandparents for her entire life because of decisions made before she was born. I called my mother on a Friday morning, 2 weeks after her visit. I told her that Marcus and I had talked, and that we were willing to meet all 4 of us at a neutral location, once, for a conversation. I told her that I was not guaranteeing anything beyond that conversation. I told her that if my father could not come to that meeting prepared to acknowledge what had happened, then the conversation would end there, and I would not continue. My mother said yes to all of it, without hesitation. We met at a restaurant in Oakville, halfway between Hamilton and North York, on a Saturday afternoon in October. My father was thinner than I remembered. He moved differently, more carefully, the Parkinson's visible in small ways, a slight tremor in his right hand, a deliberateness to how he sat. He looked at Marcus when they shook hands with the expression of a man who knows he is in debt but hasn't quite worked out how to say it yet. It was not an easy lunch. There were silences that went on too long, and moments where I could see my father choosing his words in real time, weighing them, then putting them down and trying different ones. He did not apologize the way you see people apologize in films, cleanly and completely. He did it the way real people do, in pieces, inconsistently, with gaps where his pride got in the way. But he said it. He said he had been wrong. He said he had chosen something that wasn't worth choosing and lost something that couldn't be replaced. He said it looking at the table mostly, and once, briefly, looking at me. I did not tell him it was fine, because it wasn't fine, and I think he would have known I was lying. I told him I heard him. I told him I wasn't sure yet what came next, but that I had heard him. We drove home through the October farmland between Oakville and Hamilton, Lily in the back seat with her headphones on, Marcus's hand on the gearshift. I watched the fields going past, the sky low and gray the way it gets in southern Ontario in the fall, and I thought about what it costs to hold a door shut and what it costs to open it, and whether those two things are ever really separable. We did not solve everything at that lunch. We are not solving everything now. My father's health requires more care than my mother can provide alone, and they do not have the financial resources to arrange the level of support he needs. Marcus and I have had hard, practical conversations about what we are able to offer, not unlimited, not unconditional, but not nothing. I am helping them navigate their financial situation, because it is what I know how to do, and because it is something I can offer without losing myself in it. Lily has started spending occasional Sunday afternoons with her grandmother. My father teaches her chess, badly but enthusiastically, and she is kind to him in the unself-conscious way of someone who has no old wounds to manage. There are days when I feel the weight of all of it, the lost years, the particular grief of what Lily didn't have, the work of building something with people who once tore something down. There are days when I sit in my office and look at the city I made a life in, the practice I built without their connections or their name, and I feel something clean and solid underneath everything else. My father called me last week to say he had read an article about infrastructure investment in Ontario and thought I might find it useful for a client file. It was such a small, ordinary gesture that I didn't know what to do with it for a moment. I thanked him. He said, of course. We talked for 11 minutes about something that had nothing to do with the past. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely. It wasn't a clean resolution. It was something messier and more honest than either of those things. Two people who had done real damage to each other, trying to figure out what, if anything, could be built in the space where the old structure used to be. Marcus once told me, early in our relationship, that in steel construction, there's a process called repairing a compromised connection. You don't pretend the original damage didn't happen. You work with what's there, you reinforce what can be reinforced, and sometimes you end up with something that holds more weight than the original because you understand exactly where it failed. I didn't know then how much of our life that description would cover. Lily knows the full story now, or as much of it as a 13-year-old needs to know. I told her recently, on a drive back from her grandmother's apartment, that the history between me and her grandparents was complicated, and that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She thought about it for a while, and then said that she thought it was pretty decent of me to let them back in, considering. I told her it was pretty decent of her to make room for people she'd never had the chance to know. She shrugged, and said family was weird, universally, and asked if we could stop for a Tim's. We stopped. I ordered her a hot chocolate and a tea for myself, and we sat in the drive-through lane in the October afternoon, and she talked about her civil engineering project for school, and I listened, and I thought, this is what they almost missed. Not an abstraction. Not a concept. This specific girl, in this specific moment, talking about load-bearing walls with the same earnestness her father uses when he explains why a beam connection matters. They almost missed all of it. I almost let them. I'm glad I made the call.